Today I will be making a very simple marmalade from limes, because that's the season for limes and I always have several kilograms of them. That's a little bit too much to make mojitos. So to prepare limes, you cut off the ends and then you chop them in a size you really want to have in your jam, because some people prefer the jams more chunky and some like them with a little bit smaller pieces. As you can see, I'm going to use everything, including the skin and the flesh of the limes. And I already prepared 4 cups here and measuring another cup. So let me see. And you see I'm slicing it into pretty small bits. And this is what's important when you prepare any preserves, to make it the way you like it. Obviously you need to follow the recipe, but when it comes to the texture, it's better to slice them or chop the fruit or veg, whatever you prepare, into the bits which are good size for you. And I'm measuring into a cup. Now, it's also a good idea to have everything prepared and even the recipe in front of you, just to make sure that you don't make mistakes. So in this recipe, because this is a marmalade, so it contains quite a lot of sugar, usually per 250 grams of fruit, you add 250 mils of sugar. So for a quarter kilo, you add 1 cup of sugar. So I just finished. So that was 1 kilogram. This is 5 cups. Now I'm also going to add ginger. You can see I have measured already my sugar, which I'm not going to need yet, but it's just a good idea to have everything prepared. And I grate ginger on this side of the grater, just so the pieces are pretty small. And I usually use about 2 teaspoons of ginger per 1 kilogram, but you can use a little bit more or a little bit less. Depends how you like your marmalade. And I really like it with a lot of ginger. So grating, and you will see it will be pretty small pieces. Okay, it's getting a little bit fibrous here, but that's okay. So what I usually do, I squeeze the leftovers of ginger onto the pot. And now I'm going to remove all the ginger from the grater. And add the rest. That's it. Now what you're going to do with this recipe, you need to boil your fruit for about half an hour or until the skin becomes soft. You don't add sugar or anything at this point. You just boil it, and after that you cool it down. If you add pectins, you need to add them to the cool mixture. If you just add sugar, then you can just add sugar to the hot mixture. But the first step is just boiling the fruit itself to make sure that all the skin will become soft. Another important step when you preserve is preparing the jars in which you are going to store your preserves. So while I'm boiling the limes and ginger, I also boil water, and I will sterilize some of the smaller jars in water, and some of them will be sterilized in the oven. So I mostly sterilize smaller jars, so something like this. I just put them in hot water. You can start with cold water and then warm them up. And just wanted to show you what sort of jars I use. I use recycled jars, just a normal 3-stop, because it's such a waste to chuck them out. But my favorite jars are jars by a company called WEG. They have glass lid, glass jar, rubber seal, so you put the seal over the lid, just around it, cover the jar, and then you use clips to hold the lid in place. And when the little tongue is down, it means that it's sterilized. So, sorry, it's pasteurized. That's when you fill it with jam and pasteurize it. So let me put it now. You don't need to sterilize the clips. You just sterilize the jars themselves. And the tops, you can see I'm sterilizing the metal lid as well because they cannot go to the oven. They are lined with plastic, so that would melt. And now I'm going to put the little rings. I also got some bigger jars which are in the oven, so I've got bigger rings and I've got smaller rings which are for the smaller jars. So that's what I'm sterilizing in this large pot. And put a cover on it. And I turn this one a little bit down. So the whole point of sterilizing your jars in hot water or hot oven is not just to remove bacteria, but also to prepare them for putting hot jam or other hot preserve in them. You never put hot preserve into cold jars because they would shatter. So obviously to keep them hot at the same time as you've got your jam ready to be put in jars, you need to time it well. Some people also use dishwasher set on high temperature to sterilize jars, so that's what you could do as well. And let me see what is happening in the oven. I also have some jars set here, and you can see they are being sterilized that way. So after you cooked your marmalade the prescribed time, you need to check if it's ready. I usually use cold plate, which I put in the fridge, put a few drops of the marmalade on it, and then I look when it sets. You could see it's hardly moving. When you push with your fingers or you blow, you can blow it, you can see it wrinkles on the surface. That means it's ready, it's thick enough to put it in jars. I pasteurized a lot of jars in this large pot, so I'm going to take some of them, still hot. Don't do as I do. So I'm just going to take some small ones. Okay, sitting at the bottom here. And now I'm going to put the jam in jars. You have to be careful, don't put hot jars on a surface which is cold, like stone or metal, because that may cause them to shatter. And now I'm going to put the jam in the jars. You can see I've got this large fennel. It's called passata fennel because it's mostly used for passata, for some sort of thick preserve to put in jars. When you fill up the jars, you always leave about 1.5–2 centimeters of head space, because you need this air above the preserve for the jar to close well when it's pasteurized. So I'm just adding the jam to all the jars. And also be careful that you don't spill anything on the edge of the jar, because that would prevent it from closing when you put the lid on. So I've got the small jars here, and you can see there is a little bit of jam sitting here, which you can wipe. It's still very hot, so you may use a paper towel. And I'm going to grab some of the lids because they are still sitting at the bottom of this very hot pot. So I've got a little ring which is also pasteurized, and I put it over the lid. When you work with jars which are just normal jam jars with metal lids, you just put the lid on and screw it very lightly. So don't close it all the way, just close it enough so you know it's closed, but not all the way in, because you want to allow for the air to escape when everything is pasteurized. So the last lid, okay, there it is, and put it on top of the last one. I'm going to get the clips. So I'm putting the clips on the jars. That's when you use this sort of jars. As I said, if you use normal jam jars with metal lids, you just close the lid so it's just tight but not too tight, so you could not reopen it if you need to. And once everything is closed, I'm going to put them in hot water bath and pasteurize for about 15-20 minutes. And again, you need to follow the recipe because certain fruit will need a little bit more pasteurizing time and other will not need as much. So I'm removing this pot now. And you can pasteurize in proper canning container if you do a canning process, but at home you can just use any pot as long as it's deep enough to cover all the jars. So I also put at the bottom piece of cloth, could be a paper, newspaper, and when you put it in, it means that the jars are not in contact with hot bottom of your pot. So I'm going to add hot water, and I got hot water from the jar which I sterilize all my small jars, and I will top it up with more hot water from a kettle. So you see, the jars will be completely covered, and I just switched the element on, and when the water starts boiling, you will see, you can see bubbles coming out of the jar. That means that the air is escaping, and then when we finish pasteurizing and it cools down, then the air, as it cools down, it shrinks and it pulls the lid in. So that's the whole idea of pasteurizing. And prepared that way, your preserves will last for at least a year in a pantry. So that's a very good idea to do it that way. You've got long-term storage for your crops, harvested and preserved in the way of a jam.